Steep fines and up to 6 months in prison. The Ford government unveils its latest plan to tackle homeless encampments and illegal drug use in public. His critics are calling for a more compassionate approach.
And city officials are responding to a scathing report about its treatment of refugees in the shelter system. More from the Ombudsman just ahead.
And York Regional Police release shocking video as they investigate a series of violent spot robberies. Several arrests have been made, but officers aren't done just yet.
This is Live at 5. Good evening. I'm Bakari Savage.
And I'm Lena Latafat. Thank you for joining us tonight. The province has announced new measures it says are meant to end homeless encampments and eliminate drug use in public spaces.
As CP24's Beatrice Vaisman has been at Queen's Park all day long following the latest. Beatrice.
But Carolina, this is really just the first step in helping municipalities clear encampments in public parks. This legislation was tabled today. It wasn't passed, though. It'll now have to wait until Queen's Park resumes, not until March 3rd. But essentially, the Premier was responding to a letter from some 12 mayors last week that asked for more power to be able to deal with the issue of encampments. Trouble is, as part of this legislation, the Premier essentially threatening to slap encampment drug users, so homeless people with substance abuse issues, with $10,000 fines and up to 6 months in prison. Despite that, Oshawa's Mayor Dan Carter supports the Premier having this legislation come forward. And here's a bit of what he had to say.
I was one of the ones that said that I believe that compassionate intervention is the right direction to go. I can tell you, standing in front of you today, as a recovering alcoholic and drug addict of over 34 years, the compassionate intervention saved my life. And therefore, when I speak to families that have loved ones, that they want us to do everything we possibly can. These elected officials are committed in regards to making sure those families' voices are heard.
And Oshawa's mayor there, speaking from experience himself. You heard him say that he was a recovering drug addict and struggled with alcohol abuse. He was also homeless, actually, for much of his late teens and 20s. And really, he says it's not safe for someone to be in a park, especially on a day like today, where it felt like minus 16 this morning. Propane tanks often used in these encampments. And the Premier has felt for quite some time and has been vocal about the fact that he didn't feel as though public parks were appropriate places for encampments to be. He wants them to be free for families and children to use. As part of these measures, the Premier also announcing more funding, some $75 million to go to help homeless individuals find appropriate alternate housing, $50 million for affordable housing, really just a drop in the bucket, though, and spread right across the province. And we know these heart hubs for treatment and recovery facilities that are going to open across the province. Problem is, they're not open yet. Rehab is incredibly not only expensive, really difficult to get to, and opposition leaders do not think this is the best approach to tackle this issue. Here's more from Bonnie Crombie.
As far as I'm concerned, this is not compassionate intervention, and it is only political grandstanding. It is the middle of winter, and it is the last day of the legislature. If they were committed to doing something, anything, they would have done it before today.
So part and parcel with Ms. Crombie is talking about there, this legislation not passed today. It'll now have to wait until March 3rd. As part of the Premier's suite of measures, it also includes an expansion to the Trespass Act, which gives police more powers to charge someone or to lay fines if they are repeatedly breaking the law. Back to you.
All right, Beatrice Vaisman live at Queen's Park tonight and staying at Queen's Park. The Ford government has introduced legislation it says aims to provide the cities that make up Peel Region with more independence.
The proposed changes would see the delivery of some public work services transferred from the region of Peel to Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. The affected services include stormwater infrastructure and waste collection. The province says that the move is meant to help the municipalities meet the needs of their communities.
I've been working with my colleagues across government to make sure that these changes make the most sense for these communities. They are based on the recommendations from the Peel Transition Board and the affected municipalities.
And Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie, the former Mississauga mayor, has long advocated for the separation of Peel.
I
I'm delighted if the Premier intends to move forward. Obviously, it's something I've been very committed to, that the City of Mississauga control its own destiny and stand on their own feet, as should the City of Brampton, the fourth largest city in Ontario, should really control their own destiny and pay their own bills.
Now, the provincial government had originally planned to dissolve Peel Region before reversing course in favor of finding efficiencies in its management instead. Time now is 5:05, sitting at -5 in the city today. Let's get a check on that drive home with CP24's traffic specialist, Adjoa Nsiayebwa. Hey there, Aj.
Oh, hey, Lena. Yeah, it has been a busy go. And, depending on where you're heading, starting to see a little bit of snow activity. Problems I'm also watching where there is no snow on the westbound lanes of the 401, just as you make your way through Leslie. Actually, it's past Leslie. It's a stalled truck. Now, we do have MTO blocker crews on scene, so they're blocking the 2 left lanes now. If you're in the collectors, we're seeing a bit of a delay on the approach just in the collectors. Stick with the express. And also on this East of Warden camera, we're seeing a little bit of flurry activity. Whether it was there or did come and go. If your travels do take you north of the city, this is on the 427. It's the westbound Rutherford on-ramp that takes you to the southbound 427. Not accessible. That's been blocked up. That is following a collision as well. And we're dealing with a stall. This one on the westbound lanes of the QEW, just as you make your way past the 427 Gardner, you will find that right lane and shoulder occupied. I'll send it back to you.
Okay, right now, it is actually feeling more like 13 below outside. Yeah. The blizzard warnings, they have lifted for this hour, but dangerous conditions, there's still a real possibility as snow squall warnings remain in effect for areas north of the city.
CP24's Steve Ryan is keeping an eye on this evolving situation, and he joins us live with more tonight. Steve.
Yeah, Lena and Bakari, we are up in Vaughan, just south of King City, and this is where people are told that they can expect upwards of 80 centimeters of snow north to Huntsville, west to Tobermory, and east to Kawartha Lakes. That can happen anytime between now and the next 48 hours. This is in the news because this happened last week, and it was people up in Gravenhurst and Huntsville who found themselves stuck in their cars for lengthy periods of time because of the amount of snow that fell near Highway 11. So that has caused the OPP to be out in full force. We're warning people what to do in snowstorms and what to have in the car as preparation. Here's a reaction from earlier on. Let's have a listen.
This is our time to really plan ahead and think about, are we able to drive to those conditions, adjust our driving accordingly as they change, and make sure our vehicle is also prepared. Winter tires, washer fluid, snow brush, keeping your headlights on, and just making sure your vehicle is tuned with an emergency kit and all the supplies you need in case things happen unexpectedly on your journey.
OPP Sergeant Schmidt is also telling us at CP24 today to as a reminder, drive in accordance with the conditions. If the roads are slippery, your stopping distance is that much shorter. So he's reminding us all to slow down and take our time in the snow. I'll send it back to you guys.
All right, CP24's Steve Ryan. Steve, try to stay warm. Well, the warning that the video in our next story, it may be disturbing for some viewers.
Yeah, 4 people are charged and 3 other suspects are outstanding in a series of spa robberies in Markham and Toronto.
Hello, I called 911 right now. I called 911, okay? I called 911.
Okay, November 23rd, a spa at Dufferin and Wilson. It was robbed at gunpoint by 3 suspects. About an hour later, a spa at Birch Mountain 14th Avenue was robbed. The suspects made off with money and one of the victims' cars. In both robberies, the suspects arrived in a stolen white Acura. That car was found November 28th. 3 suspects were arrested. Then on December 6th, another armed robbery happened, this time at a spa near Victoria Park, and Steeles. 2 days later, there were 2 more, one at Carlingview and Renforth, and the other at Kill and Finch.
On December 10th, police executed 2 search warrants in Toronto with the help of York Police. 19-year-old Daquan Estrada Kelly was arrested and charged with property obtained by crime, possession of a firearm, and break-in instruments.
And police are looking for 19-year-old Aiden Murray of Toronto. He's wanted on 12 charges, including armed robbery and forcible confinement.
And as part of the investigation, police seized a replica gun, robbery tools, and 2 stolen vehicles. 3 teens, aged 16 and 17, all from Toronto, have also been charged in the robberies. Police believe there may be more victims, and they're asking anybody with information to come forward.
Right now, it is 5:10, 6 below zero outside. This is Live at 5.
The back and forth continues on both sides of the border when it comes to what might happen when Donald Trump takes office. We'll break down the latest coming up. Welcome back. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is responding today to Premier Doug Ford's threat about cutting energy exports to the U.S. over tariffs.
Yeah, CP24 CJ Liu has the latest on the brewing trade battle. She joins us live from the newsroom. CJ.
Lena Bakari, Premier Doug Ford doubled down on his threat to cut off energy supply to the U.S. today, but said it would be a last resort option. We are also hearing from Donald Trump, who responded today saying that it is okay if Ontario imposed these restrictions, arguing that the U.S. is subsidizing Canada. For more on the tariff over tensions, I'm joined live now by Tom Mulclair, CTV political analyst and former NDP leader. Tom, thanks so much for your time today.
Hi, CJ. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. Well, let's get your take on Donald Trump's response to Ford's threat today. He seems pretty unbothered by it and still set on his plan to impose tariffs.
Well, it's the Donald Trump who loves the art of the deal. So he'll put conditions that get other people scrambling. And then when other people try to push back, he says, that's nothing. That doesn't bother me. It is part of the game. We signed a new deal that replaced the original North American Free Trade Agreement. And Donald Trump not only put his initials and his signature to it, he actually wrote the thing, and now he's saying it doesn't really matter. He's just going to tear that up and start imposing 25% tariffs. Right now, the people who are watching us are looking at Canadian lumber going into a mill, and I think that would be a pretty good case for Canada to try to explain to American consumers what those tariffs would mean, because the key ingredient in a new home is lumber. And the price of the home is lower thanks to Canadian lumber, which is less expensive than its American counterpart. The Americans have for years been taking us to different tribunals and courts over softwood lumber, and we win every time. But it's a waste of effort, and it is a cost that is ultimately borne by consumers. That's the point I think that Doug Ford's ads have been making quite well, by the way, in the United States. As to his threat, his chest thumping, and that sort of thing, I think we have to bear in mind also that Mr. Ford is planning to go to an early election, and he's positioning himself. He's showing himself to be a tough leader who can push back on the Americans and this bully Trump. So the contrast to Trudeau doesn't hurt him, and frankly, showing himself to be a strong negotiator also helps him with the voting public, who will be going to the polls in short order.
And it does seem like a bit of a David and Goliath battle here between Trump and Ford. But how realistic do you think is his plan to cut off energy supply? Is it something doable? How would it look like?
It's provincial authority. It is an international contract, but it's provincial authority. That sort of production comes under the aegis of the government of Ontario. And, Doug Ford even put a number on it today of 1.5 million homes. That's easy to suss out because it could be so many industries versus homes. It's a block of electricity, and that's just a calculation based on the consumption of the average American home. It doesn't mean that 1.5 million Americans' homes would be without electricity if he did cut the switch, shut the switch. But I think, CJ, the important thing for people in Ontario to realize is that Premier Ford is doing what he has to do and what he can do to try to push back on a threat that is extremely serious for Ontario, for its whole manufacturing sector. Same thing in Quebec. But Legault's playing it differently. He doesn't have an upcoming election. He was in a meeting with Donald Trump in Paris last weekend for over 10 minutes. He referenced it again today, saying that it's not part of his plan. In fact, today he announced a massive mega deal between Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec over hydroelectricity. So they do produce a lot of hydroelectricity, and they do ship a lot of it to the U.S., but it's not part of his thinking. Trudeau, on the other hand, has been asking everybody to be part of Team Canada, to talk as one and to be all on the same page. And yet Trudeau himself gave a speech where he said he would have preferred to see Kamala Harris win the election. And that obviously doesn't sit well either with the Americans or with the premiers who are around that table and being lectured piously by Justin Trudeau about the importance of being all on the same team. So there's still a lot to be learned as we try to deal with Trump 2.0. And it's been a bit of a rocky start, but I don't think that there's anything wrong whatsoever for Doug Ford to be pushing back the way he's been doing it.
All right, looks like it's a part of the process. Thanks so much, Tom. We appreciate your time today.
Good to be with you, CJ. All the best.
Thanks so much. And like Tom mentioned, a lot is on the line here. Ontario and the U.S. conduct about $500 billion of trade annually. So Lena and Bakari will be continuing to follow this as we get more reaction. Back to you.
All right. Interesting conversation with Tom Mulcair there. CJ, thanks so much. Well, the federal government has sold its stake in Air Canada. Two senior government sources confirmed to CTV News.
The government spent $500 million for a 6% stake in the airline in 2021 as part of a bailout package during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just last week, Transport Minister Anita Anand said she was, quote, examining the particular legal relationship with Air Canada in an effort to dissuade the airline from bringing in additional carry-on fees.
It is now 5:16, -5 out there. You're watching Live at 5.
And coming up, city officials are now responding to a report that said they fell short when it came to supporting refugees seeking shelter. Those details are next.
Toronto's Ombudsman is slamming the city's decision to bar refugee claimants from accessing shelter beds. But the city manager says he doesn't intend to act on the recommendations that are being made.
Okay, for the details, let's turn to CP24's Arda Zakarian, who joins us live from the newsroom. Arda.
Bakari and Lena, the city manager is not rejecting the report. He just says he doesn't agree with it. Now, let's first take a look at the refugee and asylum seekers that came to Canada in 2023. 144,000 people came to this country, and many of them chose to stay in the Toronto area where shelters were already overflowing. Toronto's Ombudsman says the city fell short in its decision to stop allowing these refugee claimants to have access to shelter beds. He says the move was unfair, poorly planned, and unintentionally discriminated on the basis of citizenship and race. The problems listed included referring people to federal services that they knew were not available. The report says this added emotional distress and left many people feeling unwelcome. The Ombudsman's recommendations include anti-racism training and consulting with groups that serve asylum seekers. The report will go to City Council. However, the city's manager says he won't be acting on some of those recommendations because he says the city is already doing the work and some don't have good value. Here is more from City Councillor Josh Matlow.
I think it was clear to most people watching this closely that many of these refugees were caught in a political tug-of-war between the City of Toronto and the federal government over many months, haggling for funding. The federal government was not funding the city enough. The city, I think, was not being fair to those refugees by keeping them out in the cold and not ensuring that they have shelter. And, you know, the biggest losers in all of this were the very people who came here because they believed that Canada was going to help them.
We also heard from Mayor Olivia Chow, who says, I welcome the Ombudsman's report. In July 2024, Council and I acted to ensure refugees were welcome in Toronto's shelter system. This is the right thing to do. No one should be sleeping on the street in Toronto. However, for many in Toronto, we know our shelter system is full. I look forward to reading the Ombudsman's report. This will need a thoughtful discussion at Council. Transparency is vital in Toronto's shelter system. This also needs to be a wake-up call for all orders of government. Funding for refugees needs to reflect the number of refugees seeking asylum in Toronto. Currently, funding is capped annually. Refugees have different needs in Toronto's compared to Toronto's homeless population, and our services need to reflect that. Back to you.
All right, Arda Zakarian live in our newsroom tonight. Thank you, Arda. You're watching Live at 5 on Toronto's breaking news, CP24.
And a chocolate lab reunited with their family. This is after being caught up in a carjacking. We're going to bring you that update with CTV's Sean Leathong next. And a successful conclusion for a Toronto family. Their dog has been found safe. This is after being stolen during a carjacking yesterday.
Yeah, CTV Toronto Sean Leathong joins us with more on this incredibly positive outcome. Tell us more about this reunion with Roxy, Sean.
Well, it's such a relief for this family, Lena and Bakari. They have their dog back in their Etobicoke home right now. The dog seems to be fine with maybe a little bit of a cut on one of its elbows after what is a pretty amazing story. Now, we do have some footage of Roxy, the 4-year-old chocolate lab, who is at home today with her family. But yesterday morning, this all began. You see, Josh Miller was driving his daughter to school not far from here when he was approached after his daughter had gone inside. A man approached his vehicle and said, "Get out of the car or I'm going to have to hurt the kids in the school." The man then took off with the car, not realizing that Roxy, the dog, was actually inside the car too. Now, they spent a day actually looking for the dog. Police said they found the car, the vehicle, which was a white Jeep Grand Cherokee, late last night, way up in Brampton near here, Ontario, and Mayfield, located in a parking lot, but the dog was not inside. Now, we spoke to Josh Miller today about this whole ordeal and what he went through today. It's quite his story. Here's what he had to say.
They thought they had seen a dead brown dog on the side of the highway. So that was kind of what we woke up to today. My father-in-law took me to go. We were going to go try to identify the dog. On the way there, we got a call from Toronto Police saying, "We think we might have spotted your dog in a park." So we turned around, went to the park. By the time we got there, the police had gotten back to us and said, "We did find a dog, but it's not your dog." So then we went back to thinking, "Oh my God, we've got to go to the highway to potentially identify Roxy on the side of the road." As we were doing that, got another call from Peel Police saying that they believed they had Roxy and they believed that they'd apprehended the suspect.
So once police had the suspect in custody, the reunion with Roxy happened relatively quickly. Josh Miller was very happy, thanking both Peel Police, Toronto Police, and there were a number of people from the community who'd helped him out. There was also a group called Eddie's that actually looks for lost animals. They had been helping him as well. So lucky that it ended up the way that it did. And also this all happened because a tipster actually spotted Roxy and called police. So all are thankful that they're home. The vehicle will be back and looked after, and Roxy will be spoiled tonight, they said, with lots of treats. Reporting live, I'm Sean Leathong. Lena Bakari, I'll send it back to you.
I'm sure that'll be the case. What a story. So glad Roxy's home, Sean. Thank you.
Happy endings with Sean Leathong. Thanks a lot. It's 5:27, feeling like minus 13 outside. This is Live at 5.
We are watching the developing weather situation north of the city tonight with dangerous snow squalls possible in some parts of this province. More on that coming up.
If you're heading north of the city, prepare for dangerous conditions and possible snow squalls. We're tracking all you need to know if you're heading out.
Steep fines and up to 6 months in prison. The Ford government unveils its latest plan to tackle homeless encampments and illegal drug use in public. His critics, though, are calling for a more compassionate approach.
And city officials are responding to a scathing report about its treatment of refugees in the shelter system. More from the Ombudsman just ahead.
You're watching Live at 5. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Lena Latafat.
And I'm Bakari Savage. The blizzard warnings, they have lifted for this hour, but dangerous conditions, there's still a real possibility as snow squall warnings remain in effect for some areas north of the city.
CP24's Steve Ryan is keeping an eye on this evolving situation, and he joins us with more on the message tonight. Steve.
Yeah, Lena, so we are expecting anywhere upwards, rather, of 80 centimeters of snow within the next 24 to 48 hours. This comes from Environment Canada, and the areas affected will be Huntsville to the north, Tobermory to the west, and Kawartha Lakes to the east. We were talking with the OPP earlier on today, and Sergeant Kerry Schmidt reminded us all who are out in the vehicles to pack a light bag just in case you happen to get stranded in the snow. You'll recall last week a lot of snow fell, over 80 centimeters of snow fell up near Huntsville and Gravenhurst, and many of those people were trapped in their vehicles on Highway 11 for hours until the OPP and the Ministry of Transportation were able to help them. Here is more from Sergeant Schmidt and more reaction that we got earlier on today with regards to this pending storm. Let's have a listen.
This is our time to really plan ahead and think about, are we able to drive to those conditions, adjust our driving accordingly as they change, and make sure our vehicle is also prepared. Winter tires, washer fluid, snow brush, keeping your headlights on, and just making sure your vehicle is tuned with an emergency kit and all the supplies you need in case things happen unexpectedly on your journey.
Be prepared in your vehicle as if you know it's going to take a long time to get to where you're going and maybe even hours. Bring some water, non-perishable food. I'm talking about, granola bars, trail mix, that kind of thing, just to keep you hydrated and fed while you're there. A warm blanket, candles, extra clothing, because you got to be prepared because things can happen very, very quickly.
Some good advice there from both commentators, and as Kerry Schmidt has been telling us all day, drive in accordance to conditions, and that means if it starts to snow, it starts to get slippery, slow down because your stopping time will decrease, and ultimately if you're going slower, the police tell us that may reduce your chances of getting into a collision. We'll send it back to you guys.
All right, Steve Ryan keeping a really close eye on this system for us tonight. Steve, thanks so much. Thankfully, no snow to worry about here at home. But for a closer look at that drive, we're going to check in with CP24's traffic specialist, Adjoa and Cia Bois tonight. Still dealing with the volume.
Yeah, a lot of volume, Lena. And, a couple of problems sprinkled in the mix. It is rush hour to be expected. So if you're headed out and you're a commuter coming out of Vaughan and using the Rutherford Road westbound on-ramp that takes you to the southbound 427, it's been blocked for an hour or so following a pretty serious collision. At one point, one of these vehicles was in the ditch, so as a precaution, they're just doing the cleanup, getting the vehicles off, and then they'll reopen that ramp. But at this point, it's still closed down. Some good news, a little bit of a better-looking drive in the collectors on the westbound 401 on the approach to Bayview. We were dealing with a stall. It was in the two left lanes. They might have just moved the camera because it's still a bit wide open through here. If you're headed through the area, that is a reason for that delay, and even bigger delays on the DVP as you make your way south and northbound. Jam solid between Bayview, Bloor, and the 401. Been searching my cameras, but haven't spotted any live lane issues. We are dealing with problems that are blocking lanes on York Mills and Don Mills, so also adding to your slow commute. Lena Bakari, I'll send it back to you.
This CP24 traffic report is brought to you by 407 ETR. Enjoy the journey with a stress-free commute.
All right, well, we're going to tell you about a wild scene on a downtown street. This was late this morning as the driver literally just kept going despite colliding with multiple vehicles. Part of it was caught on camera.
Yeah, take a look at this. This is what it looked like on Front Street near Berkeley. This is viewer video. A car heading west on the wrong side of the street struck a number of vehicles. Police tell us the vehicle eventually stopped at Front and Bathurst. The driver, in her 80s, was taken to hospital with unknown injuries. It's not known how many vehicles were hit along the way. The police investigation continues.
And police are searching for a man wanted in an assault at Broadview Station.
43-year-old Gerard Purcell is facing a number of charges, including 2 counts of failing to comply with probation. Police allege he assaulted the victim, stole and damaged some belongings, and then got away. He's described as 5'7". He weighs about 140 pounds, is bald, clean-shaven, and has brown eyes.
And the province has announced new measures it says are meant to end homeless encampments as well as eliminate drug use in public spaces.
Let's go live to CP24's Beatrice Faisman at Queen's Park, who's been following these developments all day for us. And Beatrice, the Premier's critics say this isn't a compassionate approach.
Certainly, Lena. And the reason being is, yes, you're going to be clearing up encampments in municipalities where the mayors want to get rid of these encampments in public spaces like parks. But where are people who are suffering from homelessness, drug and alcohol abuse going to go? Certainly, there's not enough beds in shelters. There's not enough affordable housing. And certainly, there are not enough rehab and treatment facilities. They're very expensive. The wait lists are often over a year long to get people the help they need. Despite all that, there was a group of mayors standing behind the Premier who say, we want these new measures implemented. We want our parks to become safer places where families and children can play without the threat of drug use happening in these parks. And so here's a bit of what one of these mayors who supports the Premier's actions, Mayor Patrick Brown from Brampton, told CP24 this afternoon.
The elephant in the room is that we have an addictions crisis in these encampments, and we'll offer shelter spaces to the individuals in encampments. They'll say no because we prohibit drug use in the shelters. And so the same old approach isn't working. Encampments are growing. Fatalities from overdoses are growing in Canada every year. It's getting worse. So, kudos to the Premier for having the courage to have this conversation.
So there's two components in this new legislation that was tabled today. Firstly, it's introduced under the Safer Municipalities Act and Restricting Public Consumption of Illegal Substances Act. What it does, and part of what you're talking about, Lena, the lack of compassion, fines up to $10,000 for homeless individuals who continue, or any individuals who continue to consume illicit drugs in parks. Well, guess what? If you're homeless, you generally don't have $10,000 to pay a fine. Secondly, prison sentences or prison terms up to 6 months in jail as well. And so the critics are saying, are we now using jails as a means to house people who don't have a roof over their head? Also, when it comes to trespassing, these new powers are going to give municipalities and police services the ability to clear people, like encampments, from any public spaces, like parks, like vacant lands as well, and get them going. Police can then offer fines, they can charge people. And so this is just an answer to some dozen mayors who wrote to the Premier last month asking for him to take action. When it comes to the opposition, though, they think there are better ways to deal with the homelessness crisis. Here's Green Party leader Mike Schreiner.
Literally, the Ford government has failed to build homes, and now they want to throw people in jail. It's not going to work. It's actually going to make the situation even worse. It's going to increase suffering in our communities. The Premier needs to recognize that when he says no to legalizing housing, when he says no to building deeply affordable nonprofit and co-op housing, when he says no to rent control, that is what is leading to the crisis of people experiencing homelessness.
And the NDP MPP who spoke today also saying, this is clear proof that the Premier has not done enough to build affordable homes across the province. The Premier is boosting $50 million to build more affordable housing. That's just a drop in the bucket, though, when disseminated to all the municipalities here in Ontario. Back to you.
All right, Beatrice Faisman reporting live at Queen's Park. Been a busy day there. Legislation has been introduced to update municipal codes of conduct as well.
The government bill would allow Ontario municipal councillors to be removed from office and disqualified from running again. So municipalities have years been calling for updated codes of conduct to address workplace harassment, as well as stricter penalties for those who violate the rules. Municipal Affairs Minister Paul Calandra notes the removal of a councillor would, among other things, require a unanimous vote by the local council.
It is meant to be a deliberately high bar. I'm not. I don't want to suggest anything other than that, because ultimately it's the people who will make that decision. But there has to be a mechanism. I've always believed that there has to be a mechanism, and I think we've hit a good balance.
And the group Women of Ontario Say No, which has been pushing for more tools to hold politicians accountable for workplace harassment, said the requirement of a unanimous vote makes it too difficult to remove councillors.
Well, the Ford government has introduced legislation it says aims to provide the cities that make up Peel Region with more independence.
Yeah, the proposed changes would see the delivery of some public work services transferred from the region of Peel to Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. The affected services include stormwater infrastructure and waste collection. The province says the move is meant to help the municipalities meet the needs of their communities.
And the provincial government had originally planned to dissolve Peel Region before reversing course in favor of finding efficiencies in its management instead.
It's 5:40 now, -6. You're watching Live at 5.
A new report says that the city failed to properly support refugees seeking shelter. The latest on what the Ombudsman had to say and how city officials are responding. That's next. Toronto's Ombudsman is slamming the city's decision to bar refugee claimants from accessing shelter beds, but the city manager says that he does not intend to act on the recommendations that are being made.
For all the details and reaction, because there's a lot of it, let's bring in CP24's Arda Zakarian, who's live in our newsroom tonight. Arda.
Lena and Bakari, I'm actually going to bring in a frontline worker, Lorraine Lamb. She is the organizer of the Shelter and Housing Justice Network. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for giving your opinion about this as well, because you directly work with people in the shelter system. What do you think of the Ombudsman's report?
I think the Ombudsman report was a really honest reflection of what I witnessed at the time in terms of the hundreds of people who were stranded outside of 129 Peters Street because they couldn't get access to a shelter bed. I think the recommendations that the report made were very fair. I don't think they were outlandish or unreasonable. I think the recommendations made are actually going to be steps towards a more equitable and transparent shelter system, which for many years people have felt has not been very transparent or equitable. So I'm disappointed that the city manager is not open to taking on those recommendations. And we'll note that this is the first time in the history of the Ombudsman's office where the findings and recommendations have been rejected. So that to me is really disappointing.
So let's touch on that. What did you think of the city manager's response? He says that they are doing some of those recommendations and some of them don't have good value.
I mean, when I look at the recommendations, they are sort of about transparency and anti-racism and better systems. I'm not sure which of those he feels don't have any value. Because to me, all of those things are very valuable, especially if we're looking to build a more equitable shelter system. In addition, in the report, he states that the housing charter is, quote, an aspirational statement. And to me, it was shocking to read that our human rights are aspirational. That was a really disappointing thing to read, and I'm not sure what he means by that.
Mayor Olivia Chow says that funding for refugees needs to reflect the number of refugees that are seeking asylum in Toronto. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am very reluctant to try to pit groups against each other. I think ultimately we need to look at the housing crisis for all people, regardless of status. And the housing crisis that we're in is a result of the failure of all three levels of government, from the feds, the province, and the city. And so this decision last year that left refugees specifically stranded outside, I think was really unfair. I think it was, I think it used refugees, to be honest, as a pawn to try to get more funding. And I don't agree with that. But I do agree with the mayor's statement that actually we need all three levels of government to be working together to support everybody who is unhoused, whether they are refugees or not.
What kind of responsibility do you think the provincial and federal governments need to take in this?
Yeah, I think I think refugees and protection and care fall under the feds. So I think they do need to step up around that. The province has failed miserably, I would say, in terms of what it means to navigate the housing crisis. Under Ford's tenure as premier, the housing crisis has worsened to a crisis that it hasn't been seen before. What we're seeing today is he wants to criminalize people who are poor and throw them in jail instead of actually building more affordable housing. He has withheld the COB rent subsidy benefits. He's refusing to put in rent controls. He's willing to put more money into policing and jails instead of actual housing and options. And so the province, I would say, has a lot to do with the blame. They haven't navigated the unlivable social assistance rates. They haven't changed that. Minimum wage is at $17 an hour when rental wage in Toronto is $43 an hour. So the province has a lot of responsibility as well. And I would say the city, they can't handle this on their own, but there are questions that I have around the city budget in terms of, more recently, the Toronto police are asking for more and more money again for next year's budget. Why are we spending more money on policing and displacing people instead of actual infrastructure to support people who are unhoused?
Lorraine, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Lorraine Lam is the organizer of the Shelter and Housing Justice Network. Back to you.
Okay, CP24's Arda Zakarian with this important update from the newsroom. It is 5:47, feeling like minus 13 outside. This is Live at 5.
Coming up, Donald Trump fires back as a threat of possible tariffs keep politicians busy on this side of the border. The very latest just ahead. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is responding today to Premier Doug Ford's threat about cutting energy exports to the U.S. in response to tariffs.
CP24 Sija Liu has the latest on the brewing trade battle. Sija.
Hi, Lena and Bakari. Well, Donald Trump does appear to be unbothered by Doug Ford's threat, although we heard from Doug Ford today, who is doubling down on his plan to cut off energy supply to the U.S. if Donald Trump imposes those tariffs on Canadian goods. Now, in a news conference today, Premier Doug Ford made it clear that while he hopes for a diplomatic resolution, he is willing to cut off energy supply as a last resort. Now, last month, Donald Trump threatened to impose a blanket 25% tariffs on all products from Canada and Mexico unless more is done to stop the flow of drugs and illegal migrants at the border. Ford has described the tariffs as the biggest threat we've seen and said it would have a devastating impact on the economy. The province conducts over $500 billion in trade with the U.S. annually. Here's more from Doug Ford today.
What we're sending a message to the U.S., you come and attack Ontario, you attack livelihoods of people of Ontario and Canadians. We're going to use every tool in our toolbox to defend Ontarians and Canadians across the border. And let's hope that never comes to that point. Let's hope we can get through this trade deal. The problem is not with Canada. The problem is with China. And China shipping in parts to Mexico, Mexico slapping on Made in Mexico stickers, and shipping them up through the U.S. and Canada and taking American and Canadian jobs. That's the problem.
And Donald Trump responded to Ford's threat today, who appears to be unfazed by the retaliation. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, that's okay if he does that. That's fine. But the United States is subsidizing Canada. It's truly a subsidy. And we shouldn't have to do that. And we have a great relationship. I have so many friends in Canada, but we shouldn't have to subsidize a country. And we subsidize them for more than $100 billion a year. And we shouldn't have to be doing that.
And other provinces are also responding to Trump's tariffs by beefing up security at the border. Alberta, for example, is investing $29 million into a new border security unit that includes specialized patrol units as well as better technology. Lena Bakari, back to you.
All right. Interesting response from Donald Trump. Sija, thanks so much for this. Now, Trump is Time Magazine's Person of the Year.
You see right here, Trump rang the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange this morning with his Time magazine cover projected on the wall behind him. Time makes its pick based on who had the biggest impact on the world over the previous 12 months. This is the second time he's been named Time's Person of the Year. The first, that was in 2016 after his first election win. Last year's pick, Taylor Swift.
Well, an unfair labor practice complaint filed by the union representing Canada Post workers over layoffs has now been resolved.
CUPW filed the complaint after some workers received temporary layoff notices while on strike. The union says a mediated settlement has been reached that requires Canada Post to notify affected employees that they are not on a temporary layoff. About 330 workers were impacted by the layoffs. Canada Post says that under the terms of the resolution, it reserves the right to make staffing adjustments in the future. 55,000 postal workers walked off the job November 15th. Wages, weekend parcel delivery, those were main sticking points. And CFIB President Dan Kelly says small businesses are particularly impacted by the long-running postal strike.
Some pretty desperate straits, look, especially those that have worked so hard to build an e-commerce presence. Look, we were caught short during the pandemic on the small business side because many retailers were just not there in terms of having websites and e-commerce sites set up so that they could serve customers during the periods of lockdown. But lots has changed. Businesses have invested heavily in e-commerce, including from small independent businesses across the country. And there are a whole host of new small and medium-sized companies that deliver exclusively through e-commerce. Canada Post is a huge player in delivery for them. They're out.
The union representing workers at rural post offices says collective bargaining with Canada Post has broken down. The Canadian Postmasters and Assistants Association says issues include wages and job security. The CPAA says its workers won't strike, and the Crown Corporation has agreed to not lock out employees as negotiations now go before an arbitrator. The union represents some 8,000 workers at more than 3,000 rural post offices across the country.
It's 5:55, feeling like 13 below outside. This is Live at 5.
It is a busy evening for Toronto sports fans with the Leafs in action here at home and the Raptors on the road. We'll tee up tonight's games coming up. Welcome back. The Leafs are back in action tonight after stealing 2 points in New Jersey on Tuesday.
In comes Austin Matthews. He can win it. Scores! Austin Matthews, breakaway goal!
All right, you just heard it. Austin Matthews scored in overtime. to lift the Leafs past the Devils 2-1, despite being wildly outshot. Tonight, the Leafs host the Anaheim Ducks, who they're in last place in the Pacific Division. They've lost 4 in a row. Puck drop at Scotiabank Arena is set for 7 o'clock.
And the Raptors are in Miami tonight, but they'll be without Scotty Barnes. Toronto's all-star forward is out for a while after spraining his right ankle earlier this week in a game against the New York Knicks. The Raptors are trying to end a 3-game losing streak when they take on the Heat tonight.
Right now it's 5:59, 6 below zero. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24.
Thanks so much for watching. CTV News at 6 is coming up next. Have a great evening, everyone.